Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, a developer advocate at Dremio, and I just want to talk about the discussion about like migrating to Apache Iceberg and just kind of like do a whiteboard explanation of sort of like what that process looks like. Because what I think a lot of people misunderstand is that they think that, let's say you have your data in Parquet, that when you move your data over to Iceberg, that you're moving it into a different file format. Okay. You really aren't. Okay. Iceberg is not a file format, so technically your data would still be stored in Parquet in the same way that it may be stored now if you're already using Parquet files or ORC files or Avro files. What Iceberg is, it's a metadata layer that sits on top of all your Parquet files or data files. Okay, that then allows query engines to understand all the different basically sea of Parquet files a lot better. So instead of saying, hey, look, I have 1,000 Parquet files, the Iceberg metadata will say, okay, well, I'm running this particular query. Based on the metadata, I really only need to scan 3 out of 1,000 files, resulting in a much faster query. Okay, and that's a real simplified idea. But again, it's just a metadata layer to help query engines and data tools to better understand the underlying data files. Okay, so knowing that, really what's happening is that when you're migrating from, let's say, having a bunch of Parquet files to having Parquet files with that Iceberg metadata layer on top of them. Okay, now, so if you're moving from point A to point B, there's a couple different approaches you can take. Okay, you could rewrite your data. Okay, so essentially I could just take, query the existing data that I have sitting in Parquet already, take it into any kind of query engine, and do something as simple as a create table as statement, which will, basically create a table from the results of that query. And that will write new Parquet files based on that query, and then write an Iceberg, a layer of Iceberg metadata on top of it with whatever tool writes to Iceberg that you're using, whether that be like Spark, Dremio, etc. So you could do that. Okay, you could do a CTAS. Another approach you can take is you can do what's called an in-place migration, where you have your Parquet metadata. You have your Parquet data already, but you don't want to have to rewrite, let's say, 2 terabytes of data. So then what you do is you use something like, in the Spark libraries for Apache Iceberg, there's a procedure called add files. Okay, and essentially what you can do is you can say, hey, you know what? I've already created this Iceberg metadata here. So I already have an Iceberg table. So the metadata defining that table already exists. But what I want to do is update that metadata to include these files that already exist as part of that table. Okay, and now basically the same data that you already had is part of a new Iceberg table. Okay, and that's the add files procedure. Other engines will probably release similar tools to be able to do the same thing. Okay, and this is assuming that basically you're running data as Parquet. Okay, so basically you're not using a Hive metastore, you're just essentially writing directly to Parquet files. Okay, so that would essentially be a way to do an in-place migration. There is another way to do it if you are using Hive. So if you have a Hive metastore, okay, so let's say in this case you have, so let's do this. Okay, you currently have your Parquet files underlying a Hive table, okay, which is tracked by the Hive metastore. So essentially you have this Hive metastore that tracks sort of like, hey, this is the folder where the particular table exists, and these are the folders where the partitions exist. And now you want to move over to Iceberg. Okay. What you can do is that also in the Spark libraries that are part of the Iceberg project, there is the migrate procedure. Okay, and what this does, again, you're going to create that Iceberg metadata. So it's going to create a whole new table, a new Iceberg table. But then what it does is that instead of rewriting the data files, you're just going to take the data that was being used by the Hive table and now associate it with the Iceberg metadata. So again, you're not rewriting the entire data. But again, you would use migrate if you're going from a Hive table to an Iceberg table. and you would use the add files procedure when you're going from just pure Parquet. You have arbitrary data files, and you just want to add those files to an existing Iceberg table. Okay, and then now there's currently in the Java libraries for Apache Iceberg. I don't think they're fully there yet, as far as like some sort of like SQL or call procedure you can use. There is like a Delta Lake and eventually a hoodie converter. So essentially, what would happen is that, let's say you have, so again, everything is always like basically okay, so let's say this is Delta Lake metadata, because at the end of the day, Delta Lake is similar in a sense where it's just a metadata layer on top of existing Parquet files. Okay. Okay, and then let's see here. What's the name? I always forget the name of the class. So Delta Lake, Iceberg, migration. There's a class for it. This is an article I wrote on the subject a while back, so I'm just scroll to where that part is. Okay, yeah. So basically, you have like this snapshot Delta Lake table. This snapshot Delta Lake table class, and they're going to have the same thing for hoodie. And what it does, it just basically takes the latest snapshot from that metadata and then moves it over into an Iceberg table. So basically, what it would do, as I understand it, is that it will read the latest snapshot of the Delta Lake metadata, essentially, and then take that and create a new Iceberg table that has like a matching schema and all that. And then also I think it is going to be rewriting the Parquet files. I'm not 100% certain on that one, or if it'll just refer to the same Parquet files. But essentially, you do have that. Again, right now, I think basically making it a more ergonomic thing to use is coming. But again, also a thing you can do if you want to kind of get into the same situation, this can also be done with a CTAS. Okay, so you could use a platform like Dremio. Okay, and essentially where you can connect Delta Lake tables and Iceberg tables both to Dremio, and you can just use a CTAS to then convert that Delta Lake table to an Iceberg table. Okay, so there's a lot of ways you can move data from point A to point B. The question sort of is like, do you want to rewrite the data or not? If you don't want to rewrite the data, then it's add files. But there can be benefits to rewriting the data and using things like CTAS to rewrite the data, because maybe you weren't a big fan with how, maybe, yes, it's a 2 petabyte table and it might take a second to write that data to a whole new table. But maybe you're not a fan of the way it was partitioned before or how the data was sorted in those Parquet files. You can use that opportunity to do that CTAS to resort the data, repartition the data, make any updates to the schema. So that way, all those changes you've been wanting to make, you can make. And now you have a nice pristine Iceberg table. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a little bit more perspective on sort of like the big picture when it comes to like migrating from wherever to Iceberg. Because at the end of the day, again, Iceberg is just a metadata layer over your existing data files. You're still just writing Parquet. Your engines are still reading Parquet or C or whatever data files. But the Iceberg metadata just allows it to sort of understand what's going on in the table better to be able to plan better queries, especially on larger data sets stretched out across multiple data files. Okay? Because if there was only one data file, that would be pretty simple, right? I got to scan that one data file. But when you have 1,000 data files, having that metadata to allow an engine to know, hey, I only need to scan those 3, well, that can make a whole difference between having to wait 3 hours for a scan versus a few seconds. So hopefully that summarizes that. My name is Alex Merced, developer advocate at Dremio. Make sure to follow me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at AM Data Lakehouse if you don't already. Okay. And again, make sure that, keep checking in, trying to always put out more content to help you understand sort of like how to wade through this sort of data lake house world. See y'all later. Have a great day and enjoy.